Chapter 1541, Father. The teleport had been Lisa's own technique, sending her far away, in a place Khan's senses couldn't reach, probably where her fight would happen. Nevertheless, Lisa wasn't gone. She would never be as long as the mental connection existed, and Khan closed his hand and eyes, focusing on that permanent channel. The end was truly nigh. It didn't get any closer than that, so Khan had to remember why he was fighting so hard. It wasn't about the nightmares anymore. They were gone forever. Khan had won that battle. It wasn't even about a lofty sense of duty. Khan might have completed the Naxx mission, but he was no chosen one or fated champion, or, at least, he didn't feel like one. Sure, Khan wanted to save the regulated universe and its people, sparing them from the suffering he knew far too well. However, there was something else at the core of Khan's struggles, now more than ever. He was finally happy. He had obtained the life he wanted, which he wouldn't trade for anything in the world. Everything was about defending that life now, but not out of virtue of leadership positions. As much as Khan's status increased, he knew his priorities. He was a husband before he was a noble. He was a father before he was a lord. And, to continue being a husband, see Yeza grow, and take care of her soon-to-be little brother, Khan had to defeat what awaited him ahead. Therefore, he reopened his eyes, turning to cross that last bit of condensed space. With the first step, the distant mountain teleported, seemingly arriving in the current quadrant. With the second, Khan got even closer to that landmark, starting to spot details about its surface. Once Khan took his third step, his figure exited the stratum of condensed space, putting him right before the mountain's base. That structure towered far above him, its peak seemingly striving to pierce the very sky, but failing to attract his gaze. That wasn't due to lack of majesty. The mountain was truly immense, acting as a pillar that strived to connect ground and sky, but far greater things stood at its base, preventing Khan from looking anywhere else. The Emperor was there, standing proudly with his red cape toward Khan, his arms crossed in challenge and preparation for what was about to unfold. The Black Mountain also featured a giant, darker than black ellipse at its base, acting as another dimensional door that Khan's senses' best efforts couldn't even attempt to pierce. At last, two black figures rested before the ellipse, the long-haired one lazily sitting on the ground while the short-haired one stood sternly at his side. Both black figures featured the scarlet eyes robes and fluttering capes. They also wielded proper white sclerae with red irises at their center, vouching for their status as kings. Yet, the evolved warriors' foreheads displayed a difference that couldn't go unnoticed. They wore the king's iconic two horns, but a third one grew between them, highlighting something that their auras made undeniable. Gauging an evolved warrior's prowess through mere perception wasn't an exact science. Still, a vast difference in power level could lead to quite accurate impressions. Khan was far above the average evolved warrior. Even kings were no match for him, and his hunches knew it. However, they conveyed a very different impression now. The worry that the Scarlet Eyes army could have assets stronger than the king's had turned out to be true, embodied by those two three-horned evolved warriors. That wasn't even the end. The two three-horned evolved warriors weren't just stronger than the Scarlet Eyes kings. They were existences Khan instinctively acknowledged as equals to himself and the Emperor. The instinctive acknowledgement was far from rational, but Khan had long since learned to trust that sixth sense. It had only grown more reliable with time anyway, so he had to believe it, even if it meant accepting that existences at his level were mere underlings in the enemy's army. Still, that concerning finding didn't lead to any hesitation. Khan stepped forward, reaching the Emperor's side, joining him in his stern inspection of those two opponents, addressing that now obvious trend. "Let me guess," Khan announced, relying on the Naxx way of speaking. "To get to your god, we must defeat your first." Khan didn't really expect any answer. There was no point in those, either. He and the Emperor would fight anyone who stood in their way anyway. Yet, that tease didn't cause a reaction, making the sitting evolved warrior adjust himself and brush his long hair away to wear a mocking grin. "Our dear father won't waste time with beings weaker than us," the long-haired alien said through an exhaled whisper that Khan and the Emperor's brain instinctively translated. "Our father tasked us to stop anyone from disturbing him," the standing, short-haired alien added, speaking through a similar whisper. "So, you won't pass." Khan could argue that the true chaos shouldn't have led him and the Emperor there in the first place if the goal was to protect the god. Still, that clearly wasn't the whole story, and those announcements featured curious details. The Scarlet Eyes scouts and kings referred to their leader as God. Khan had heard that with his own ears. However, those two three-horned evolved warriors called that being father, as if to highlight their special status. Nevertheless, even that didn't matter. The two evolved aliens had basically confirmed that the true Chaos God was on the other side of that elliptical gate, and Khan had no time to waste. Which one do you want? Khan wondered, still using the Nax way of speaking, but addressing the Emperor. I like the sassy one. Ah, the Emperor cried. I want both. I'm not leaving my pregnant wife to fight longer than necessary, Khan scolded, and we need this challenge to decide which one of us gets to fight the god. The Emperor didn't forget about his deal, but he also didn't want to miss that long-awaited opportunity. Luckily, one of his opponents made that decision for him. Neither of you is worthy of challenging our father, the standing, short-haired alien claimed, making the Emperor smirk in response. You can take the other warrior, Lord Blue Shaman, the Emperor laughed loudly. I'll fight this one. Chapter 1542, Perfect Sons. The Emperor didn't rely on any special speaking method, but the excitement that echoed through his vast presence conveyed a message that could overcome any language barrier. The announcement also caused the usual mayhem, which that dark but glowing environment easily endured. Even the two alien evolved warriors appeared unaffected by the Emperor's innate might, but his excitement did cause a peculiar reaction. The sitting, long-haired warrior placed his cheek on his palm, seemingly amused by that playful scene. Evident interest also invaded his relatively young face, showcasing more emotion than Khan had ever seen anyone else in that species do. Your side looks fun, the sitting alien exclaimed. It makes me want to join you. Khan couldn't help but arch his eyebrows. That statement had to be a joke, but it sounded too extreme for someone belonging to the true Chaos Army. Those assets weren't knack, but their individuality had to have a limit. Nevertheless, the standing, short-haired alien threw a stern glare at his companion that almost looked helpless, seemingly vouching for its veracity. It sounded impossible, but Khan didn't really dwell on that part of the issue. He scratched his head before shrugging his shoulders, giving an honest answer. I'll accept anyone, so feel free to join us. Though we'll still have to kill your god, most likely. Oh, but you can't, the sitting alien responded. Our dear father is a true god. Still, your side might have a chance if you let me take over it. The statement didn't sit well with the Emperor, but Khan replied before the Thilku could change his mind about his choice of opponent. Take over how? By tainting you all with my true chaos, of course, the sitting alien answered, elevating myself to our father's status, creating an energy that might defeat him. Stop with your heresy, the standing, short-haired alien scolded. You are so boring, brother, the sitting alien sighed, slowly standing up, spreading his arms at his two enemies in helplessness. Do you see what I have to deal with? Nothing but dull, bottomless loyalty. Are you saying you aren't loyal? Khan wondered. I am, the now standing, long-haired alien said. I'm the most loyal son our father could ever create. This twin of mine and all my little brothers are puppets in comparison. Something could be lost in translation, but Khan's brain was literally turning those strange whispers into the closest meanings he could understand, which conflicted with the scene. The long-haired alien had soft facial features that made him look like a young adult rather than a fearsome soldier. Meanwhile, the short-haired alien had rough facial features that reeked of utmost sternness. He shared no real similarities with his self-proclaimed twin. If anything, those two seemed to mirror Khan and the Emperor more than themselves. That vague resemblance gained more ground as soon as Khan noticed it, giving birth to strange thoughts that he could somehow explain. The true chaos imitated the mana in many ways, and Khan and the Emperor were children of the latter. One was playful and with soft facial features, while the Emperor was stern and rugged. That could easily be a case, but what were the chances of the two greatest products of the mana to be so similar to those three-horned evolved warriors? Even their status seemed to match. Of course, Khan didn't let any of those unnecessary thoughts seep into his expression, but the long-haired alien seemed to sense something anyway. You noticed it, the long-haired alien chuckled in satisfaction. The universe follows some inescapable patterns. It's not a case that the mana birthed counterparts to our father's first and most perfect sons. That confirmation could make Khan rethink his entire idea of the universe. However, truth be told, he already understood that part on an instinctive level. Even Lisa had told him as much, and some of that subconscious knowledge even came from the Mana's heart. Still, there was a flaw in that reasoning, which Khan didn't hesitate to point out. If that were true, our side would also have a god. Gods are outside the universe's patterns, the short-haired alien stated, intervening. Our father surpassed them and shared part of that divine achievement when birthing us. Khan had to admit the topic was quite intriguing. If it weren't for the whole universal threat and the need to save his world, he wouldn't mind engaging in a long conversation with those black evolved warriors. He would even bring his own drinks. Yet, the long-haired alien didn't find his twin's statement as interesting, leading him to voice a helpless sigh. See, the long-haired alien asked. As our dear father's first and perfect sons, we inherited his main traits and skills. My twin got all the uninspired loyalty to the true chaos. Weren't you the loyal one? Khan pointed out. I am, the long-haired alien confirmed. I am loyal to our father's first and truest desire. Just like he surpassed the Mana, I aim to surpass him, continuing his legacy. You are an ungrateful heretic, the short-haired alien rebuked, disregarding the gift of life our father gave us. And you are so narrow-minded you can't do anything without our dear father's direct command, the long-haired alien responded. My ambition makes me the superior twin, the only one worthy of succeeding our father. That bickering made the two evolved warriors look like siblings more than any non-existent superficial similarities, but Khan couldn't let it drag on any longer. It had been interesting at first, especially when it came to the idea of gaining a new ally, but it had just become a waste of time now. So, is this a test? Khan wondered. Your god, or father, knew the Mana would create counterparts and decided to make us fight suitable battles to prove the true chaos superiority. Khan's guess mainly came from the number of kings the elite team had encountered. The Scarlet Eye's army had to have more of those, but the true chaos had decided to match his group's numbers. Our father's plans are only for our father to know, the short-haired alien declared. As for the children of the Mana, assimilation is your fate. I hate to agree with my twin, the long-haired alien added, but you indeed have no chance to win. Khan and the Emperor ended up glancing at each other before refocusing on their respective opponents, and the entire world trembled due to the mere combative mood that followed. Chapter 1543, Bloodline. The Emperor had adopted his methodical, almost rhythmic, pace to contain his impossibly vast aura, applying that habit to his gestures and very voice. Meanwhile, Khan had stopped being a permanent, walking calamity after uncovering the true nature of his element. Nothing blew up anymore unless he wanted to, almost making him appear weaker than he actually was. The trip inside the relatively brittle ship and among weaker companions had also applied limits on what the Emperor and Khan could unleash, but that wasn't the case anymore. The two three-horned aliens weren't only opponents that neither Khan nor the Emperor could underestimate. The surrounding world was also expendable. There was nothing Khan and the Emperor had to be worried about destroying, removing any possible limitation from their existences in a way that neither the regulated nor the pocket universe had ever experienced. Everything shook as the Emperor let his energy and drives flow freely through his body and aura. The soul bulging of his muscles unleashed earthquakes and shockwaves that made the very concept of matter resonate with his suffocating excitement. Meanwhile, Khan let his violent side go wild. The destructive aspects of his element invaded his surroundings, infecting them with a purple-red halo that generated thundering sparks. The result of those removed limiters was pure chaos. The black surface shattered everywhere, and its debris crumbled even further, turning into rising trails of energy that resembled open wounds. The destruction was so widespread that Khan, the Emperor, and the two aliens lost their footholds, leaving the four hovering above broken debris and raw energy. Nothing in their immediate surroundings could exist, except for a single, gigantic structure. Everything around the mountain was falling apart, except for the mountain itself. Its fabric looked immune to the Emperor's suffocating existence and Khan's destructive will, even keeping its elliptical portal perfectly stable. It reached the point where the ground under the mountain shattered, only for the latter to remain in its place, hovering like a permanent landmark in that crumbling environment. Whatever was keeping the mountain stable was stronger than the Emperor and Khan's passive existences, but they didn't focus on it yet. Their opponents' states prevented any distraction. Just like the now floating mountain, the two three-horned evolved warriors showed no surprise or meaningful reaction to the impact with those oppressive auras. Khan and the Emperor shot forward at the same time, crossing themselves to reach their respective opponents, causing violent impacts that vastly surpassed what their auras had unleashed. Khan had unleashed his real speed, but the long-haired alien had reacted to it, crossing his arms to block his instantaneous kick. Nevertheless, while the alien's arms endured the blow, his figure didn't. The evolved warrior shot backward, flung away by a force his flying technique couldn't hope to oppose, ending up far behind the floating mountain. Meanwhile, something similar unfolded between the Emperor and the short-haired alien. The former charged forward, amassing even more momentum than what he had unleashed when destroying the celestial body, only to see his opponent remaining in one piece. That was a revolutionary experience for the Emperor, like finding a toy he could actually play with. The short-haired alien even pushed it one step forward, raising his arms to block the charge. The Emperor's huge shoulder slammed into the alien's far tinier hands, pushing both away, making them disappear somewhere far behind the floating mountain. Khan watched the exchange unfold while appearing before his opponent, keeping his gaze on the distancing Emperor and short-haired alien until they got too far away to inspect with his bare eyes. Even Khan would have problems enduring the Emperor's shoulder charge, but his opponent's arms didn't shatter or anything, allowing the prolonged push to happen. The same went for the long-haired alien. Khan hadn't held back anything with his kick, but his opponent's arms were fine, albeit still crossed. "We learned about your physical capabilities," the long-haired alien announced, lowering his arms, not surprised that Khan was in front of him. "You wield a power that is neither mana nor true chaos but is resistant to both." That information network didn't surprise Khan. Humankind could achieve something similar without being born from the same energy, and the true chaos had already somewhat acknowledged him. "Are you about to tell me that the true chaos developed something similar?" Khan wondered. The mana did that, too, but it was quite disappointing. Khan's surroundings changed color during that short exchange. His existence automatically tainted the world around him, creating an expanding purple-red halo. "No," the long-haired alien stated. "The true chaos met and defeated creatures of similar prowess and deemed them inferior." "Then, my bloodline is an exception," Khan argued, seeing how its influence can make the mana resist the true chaos. "As interesting as that would be," the long-haired alien said, "you are mistaken. That path is a dead end. It can create monstrous bloodlines but can't evolve into godhood." "The universe is boundless," Khan responded. "Countless paths can be true and correct at the same time." "You are wrong again," the long-haired alien rejected. "Gods are superior but specific beings. Their powers extend past the individual without forsaking it." There was a deep, wise lesson to be learned there, but Khan's curiosity never had a chance to win. The situation was too severe and time-sensitive for those sides to appear. "Look, I'm not that smart," Khan admitted, scratching his head, "but I know that if I kill you and your father, you are wrong." "Did you forget what my twin said, Khan, son of Brett?" the long-haired alien asked. "Our dear father shared part of his divinity with us, first and most perfect sons." "Yes, the whole shard of magnificence thing," Khan recalled, waving his hand dismissively while sparks gathered behind him. "It wasn't that magnificent. Our little brothers can only imitate divinity," the long-haired alien explained as chunks of the shattering soil stabilized, creating tiny rivers of debris that converged into his palm. The process wasn't anything special. That world was made of true chaos, so controlling it to condense into a single point wasn't exactly impressive. Khan could do the same with anything his energy tainted. Nevertheless, those rivers of debris never stopped condensing, eventually escaping what Khan could sense. All the converging true chaos disappeared inside a dot too small to see, before something akin to an explosion of scorching energy flashed outward. Chapter 1544, Maker. The heat was so intense that Khan had to send a continuous stream of mana toward his cells to boost their resilience. Mana also had to escape from his figure to shield him, but something reached him anyway. Sparks flashed all over Khan as his mana shattered the scorching heat wave. His empowered skin remained unaffected, but the temperature was too high, littering his trousers and cape with expanding, burning holes. The heat wasn't the end, either. Something minuscule but blinding hovered in the long-haired alien's palm, shining so brightly Khan had to squint his eyes to endure its glow. That blinding, scorching dot even released a certain pulling force Khan had to oppose actively. He had to control himself and his mana to avoid getting sucked into that minuscule technique. The surrounding debris wasn't as lucky, falling prey to that suction force, burning inside the blinding dot to fuel its almost unbearable heat. In a way, the trails of debris that converged toward the blinding dot reminded Khan of his training technique. However, to his dismay, his squinted eyes didn't make him blind to the spell's real nature. The suction force didn't come from a hungry drive or a specific technique. It was a mere consequence of what the blinding dot was. The same went for the heat and radiance. The long-haired alien wasn't doing any of that. The dot simply couldn't help but gain those features. Because the suction force was gravity, and the heat and radiance came from something Khan skimmed through when researching entropy. The long-haired alien had caused nuclear fusion to happen on the spot, making the dot a miniature star. There are two fundamental divine powers, the long-haired explained as if sensing Khan's realization. Matter creation and matter manipulation. Those abilities weren't exclusive to gods. Every mana-enhanced individual could generate mana and manipulate it, technically falling under those categories. Yet, Khan understood what his opponent really meant. Sure, he could turn his mana into pretty much anything, but a proper star was several levels beyond the reach of his skills. Moreover, Khan's flexibility came from his element. After all, chaos was the origin of everything and could assume endless shapes. Instead, the long-haired alien didn't use any special true chaos. He didn't even summon any of his energy. He merely took what happened to surround him and condensed it until nuclear fusion unfolded. As you can see, the long-haired alien continued, I inherited our dear father's matter manipulation. The celestial bodies you have encountered were my making. The long-haired alien suddenly closed his hand, making Khan's survival instincts scream, only to quiet down when the blinding dot disappeared. As such, the alien stated, smiling, you may call me the Maker. A sudden, distracting, catastrophic event claimed Khan's gaze. A pitch-black wave so tall and wide it could put worldwide tsunamis to shame rose from far away, submerging the floating mountain's left side and adding several layers of soil to the area. Khan couldn't see the wave's origin but could guess where it came from. He had lost track of the Emperor and the short-haired alien, but the apocalyptic calamity was made of true chaos, so it had to be the latter's technique. Except that there was no technique to speak of at all. The wave truly was immense, seemingly wanting to challenge the mountain's height while also stretching far past it, reaching as far as the areas with condensed space. However, that was it. The wave was nothing more than a mass of true chaos pushed forward by gravity and initial momentum alone. Of course, the quantity of true chaos inside the wave was breathtaking. It was actually incalculable. Khan could change the weather in entire quadrants, taking over their symphony. Yet, that still meant relying on the world's mana, and the pitch-black attack was bigger than anything Khan had ever produced without doing that. The world on the left side of the floating mountain wasn't the same after the wave finished crashing. For once, the giant mountain with the elliptical gate wasn't floating anymore. The wave had refilled the gap under its base, solidifying to turn into new ground. Something similar happened to the battlefield's left side, creating a messy mountain chain that stretched as far as the eye could see. And, something exploded among that just-formed mountain chain, revealing a dark red figure digging through its fabric to climb back out in the open. The Emperor jumped onto a slope, showing how the apocalyptic wave had been able to push him away. Khan didn't really have to think or review the event. The long-haired alien, or Maker, had already given him the answers he needed. His opponent could manipulate the true chaos to the point of giving birth to stars, so his twin had to have the ability to produce enough energy to build them. My twin is so unsophisticated, the Maker sighed, also inspecting the mess on the other side of the battlefield. Our dear father never gave us names, but I call him the Source. The Emperor never looked in Khan's direction, snapping him out of that giant distraction. Still, his brain didn't have the gift of stopping churning thoughts, awarding him with a terrifying realization. Both the Maker and the Source wielded truly shocking powers to the point that Khan would struggle to believe them if he hadn't seen them in action with his own eyes. However, there was something even bigger behind all that. The alien twins had only inherited parts of their father's powers, meaning the true Chaos God could wield both and probably more. That was the scale of going against a being that could create a whole universe, and Khan had to admit that his hopes dwindled by the second. No matter how he reviewed the issue, victory looked impossible, but he would fight nonetheless. Maker, I must apologize, Khan announced, reclaiming the alien's scarlet gaze. I planned to test the waters in the hope of saving something for later, but it seems I disrespected you. Khan lifted his hand, and mana immediately came out of his palm, gathering and condensing above it until it turned into a mass of thundering sparks. Each flashing spark released a thunderous noise, but they gradually morphed, growing deeper and gaining a certain rhythm that almost made it resemble a growl. This is no star, Khan declared, glancing at the unstable mass of mana hovering above his palm, but I'm pretty sure it can eat those. Chapter 1545, Clash. Since the final opponent had yet to show himself, Khan had planned to hold back, both to keep information about himself a secret and to avoid tiring himself out. That was a regular battle strategy, not something especially devised for the true Chaos God. After all, information was power, and Khan needed any possible edge to win against that enemy, no matter how slight it was. However, Khan's current opponent could turn mere energy into stars, and the other side of the battlefield featured a warrior who could generate enough true chaos to build a whole universe. The scales had never been bigger, standing beyond the limits of what a human brain could comprehend, so Khan couldn't hold back. He had no confidence in winning without going all out, and lives could be lost with each second he wasted in that battle. Khan and the Cloud spell always had a problematic relationship, but that was in the past. The two couldn't be closer now. Actually, there was no real difference between them anymore. One was simply wilder and more unrestrained when it came to what it desired. And what both Khan and the Cloud desired was quite simple. They wanted to get that curse done with once and for all, to protect the dear ones, and finally get the chance to enjoy their embrace without having to worry about universal threats looming over their heads. Luckily, the road toward that goal was quite straightforward. Khan and the Cloud simply had to obliterate anything and anyone on their path. The Cloud didn't expand, but more mana flowed into its relatively limited shape, adding power and brightness to its growling sparks. Meanwhile, Khan split the mana inside his body into multiple strands of energy, forcing them to clash against each other to release even more power. The theory behind the transcendent step went on full display, and Khan pushed it even further, filling every inch of his flesh with enough raging energy to make several ordinary bodies instantly blow up. Even Khan, despite his incredible body, felt on the verge of blowing up. After all, the mana released through the transcendent steps theory wasn't something that could be contained or controlled. At most, it could be directed toward specific techniques to unleash incredible moves. Yet, Khan did precisely that, relying on his cell's utmost support and the best his mental capabilities could offer to control the mana raging through his flesh, keeping it contained inside his figure. As a result of that, Khan's body inflated, as if performing the harshest physical task in the world. His muscles bulged and his veins popped out, adding some mass to his shredded build. He never gained monstrous or just inhuman proportions, but the change was quite evident. Of course, that wasn't anything new. The king in Aina had faced that same technique, albeit in a weaker fashion. What Khan's body could contain depended on his attunement with mana, which had reached its utmost limit after that battle. The proficiency level Khan had labeled as embodiment could now show its full power, applying an equally heavier weight on his mind. Containing such an immense amount of energy that Khan couldn't generate naturally was mentally taxing. He also had to keep feeding his cells to prevent his body from exploding, filling more of his already overloaded brain capacity. On top of that, Khan even had to save something for his actual techniques. That superior proficiency level would be useless if he couldn't deploy the transcendent steps forms otherwise. Therefore, it stood to reason that Khan would forsake his spells to focus on his martial arts. However, the growling, thundering cloud didn't deplete any of his mental capacity. It was connected to him and partially relied on his mana, but was also a completely separate being. As such, Khan didn't need to manage, order around, or be burdened by the cloud, only focusing on his martial arts while the spell did whatever it did best. That separation didn't go unnoticed. The Maker inspected Khan and the growling cloud with contained but evident interest, mostly focusing on the latter since the true chaos had no data on that ability. Moreover, there was something else about the cloud that the Maker couldn't ignore. In a way, the spell surpassed the inherited realm the Maker was a master of. That mass of thundering mana wasn't nearly comparable to an actual star, but it was undoubtedly alive. The Maker knew about divine matters far more than Khan, so that ability gained a different meaning in his mind. It wasn't quite the same as creating life, but Khan's chaos had indeed bordered on the realm of godhood. Of course, that made perfect sense. Khan might have rejected the mana's offer, but he had still inherited crumbs of its knowledge. Also, the whole Nax mission had always been about empowering a different kind of chaos to a level similar to or superior to the true chaos, but having a new nature. Khan had partially succeeded at that, basically obtaining a mortal version of what a god should wield. He could actually push it a bit further, but hated the idea. "I wonder," the Maker muttered, his strange whisper barely resounding past the cloud's thundering growl. "If I were to taint you, would I be able to surpass my dear father?" Khan didn't miss how the Maker had dropped the plural, which gained even more meaning since his brain had made sure to translate that point. The alien's ambition was seeping out, and the area reacted to his existence. The hand the Maker had closed reopened, joined by his other one. Trails of true chaos started converging in his palms again, condensing until that glowing blackness flashed with blinding light. 2 stars now hovered above the Maker's hands, but Khan let his eyes face their light, uncaring of whether they would blind him. More veins popped out of his skin, too, the blood inside them clotting to add black shades to his figure. Then, the growling cloud shot forward, and the Maker threw his stars at it, unleashing an explosion that could burn entire solar systems to the ground. Chapter 1546, Sturdy. The apocalyptic clash had multiple catastrophes unfolding simultaneously, and each could eradicate any trace of life that dared to exist in their presence. The heat was more than unbearable. It was obliterating, unleashing such scorching force that both ground and air vanished before even having the time to burn. The blinding light seemed to gain physical properties, piercing anything that dared stand in its path, acting like the sharpest blade in the world. Also, an invisible but unstoppable force expanded outward, pushing everything away, preventing anything from remaining within that spherical detonation. However, something did remain inside. Actually, it advanced through that series of life-ending catastrophes. Stars were quite outside what Khan could handle, even miniature ones like those unleashed by the Maker. They messed with too many laws of the universe and wielded features too extreme to be anywhere near approachable, even by someone at Khan's level. It didn't help that the Maker had detonated his miniature stars, basically unleashing the entirety of their breathtaking might into a single, obliterating attack. That burst of piercing light, scorching heat, and unstoppable force was several times deadlier than a standing star, but it ended up working in Khan's favor. Despite everything, destruction was Khan's comfort zone, and that was even more true for the crackling cloud. While more violent, those bursts of light, heat, and force were also more brittle than a solid star. They were energy rather than matter, so they were easier to break even further. And the cloud did exactly that, standing before Khan while acting both as a shield and his best offensive asset. Its thundering cries roared to no end while its sparks kept flickering, unleashing something that went beyond mere destruction. The light, heat, and sheer force vanished upon touching the cloud's crackling radiance, seemingly unable to pierce its natural aura. Of course, that wasn't exactly the case. The exploding stars could indeed overwhelm the cloud. They just never had the chance to, since nothing could exist around the spell. Khan had learned to attune his destruction to specific materials to limit its effects, but the situation didn't need anything of the sort. The cloud only had to break everything and everyone, forsaking any possible distinction. The light cracked and shattered, replaced by darkness. The energy affected by that unbearable kinetic energy split and vanished, and the expanding force's very momentum yielded to the cloud's influence, choosing stillness and death. That wasn't mere entropy anymore. Just like Khan had learned from the Mana's heart, so did his element, touching upon what could only be described as the very essence of destruction. The very fabric of reality seemed at risk of falling prey to the cloud, creating a dimensional rift no different from the elliptical portals. Yet, those barriers held strong, and the pocket universe's structure remained intact. But that wasn't the end of the cloud's power. Its obliterating advance turned the incoming attack into raw energy, which the sparks greedily devoured to add fuel to the spell. It was as if Khan had applied his blood vortex to the cloud. Except that his mind and mana had nothing to do with it. He knew that technique, so his spell knew it, too, and could use it as part of its existence. After all, the cloud wasn't a mere spell. It was a living being and, as such, it could feed itself with whatever it deemed suitable. The absorption, or feeding, of the raw energy generated through the destruction of what the exploding stars had released changed the cloud. The spell never stopped advancing, but crackling protuberances grew from its thundering fabric, as if they were tentacles or arms meant to extend the range of its unstoppable destruction. The cloud's main body also grew in size, condensing on top of that. Its cries started to pierce the deafening roars that had taken control of the area, too, almost announcing that a new ruler had descended. Meanwhile, Khan was behind the cloud, crossing the path it cleared, but experiencing some leftover heat, force, and piercing light nonetheless. There was little to be done about that. Completely defending against an exploding star was simply impossible, and the energy it unleashed was literally everywhere in no time. The cloud could clear a path through that scorching force, but Khan remained surrounded in it, so he burned. His trousers and cape took fire and disappeared. Charred patches formed on his layer of clotted blood vessels, and even his resilient blue hair burned, its tips releasing sizzling sounds that the apocalyptic event suppressed. Still, Khan's advance never stopped. His mana flew forward, and he followed it until the blinding scenery finally receded. Truth be told, Khan could hardly see at that point. No matter how much he empowered his cells, his eyes were unable to inspect anything with all that blinding light around him. The surrounding mess also tried to hinder Khan's senses, but the cloud acted as his guide, and its clash with something relatively solid snapped him into action. The spell had reached the Maker, only to find his arm stretched, wielding another miniature star that made the two start fighting to devour each other. The miniature star trapped the cloud in its gravitational, scorching force, while the latter unleashed the full extent of its destructive power on the condensed celestial body, unable to get rid of it quickly. The two attacks ended in a stalemate, but Khan had already moved, some of the mana contained inside his body fueling his techniques. Khan remained behind the cloud and its expanding tendrils, but a second Khan also appeared behind the Maker, his leg already descending toward his head. The leg obliterated anything on its path, cutting through the light and scorching air that separated the second Khan and the Maker. The attack even landed on his head, pushing his long hair away, only for gales to blow from the opposite direction. That wasn't a counterattack. It simply was a natural reaction to the clash between an unstoppable force and an immovable object. Khan's pierce did hit the Maker. His head merely endured it, sending back part of its force. And, as the wind blew on Khan's face, a strange whisper that his brain automatically translated reached his ears. "Our dear father made us quite sturdy." Then, a miniature star quickly formed right before Khan's face, exploding on the spot. Chapter 1547, Shame. On the other side of the battlefield, far on the left of the no longer flying mountain, the Emperor was in a far dimmer environment. The chaotic land the Source had created by unleashing a torrent of true chaos did shine with dark light, but its glow was incomparable to what was happening on the right side of the battlefield. Khan was facing actual stars, and their radiance ended up claiming the Emperor's gaze. Still, strangely enough, that distant light remained limited to its side of the battlefield, as if unable to invade the other perfect sun's domain. The Emperor could only watch it from afar, as if gazing at a star from inside the safety of a planet's orbit. The scene was truly magnificent, but the Emperor focused on features that had little to do with that spectacle of blinding light. He sensed the incredible power on display and experienced bottomless gratitude, as well as profound shame. The gratitude was toward that unlikely companion the Emperor had found outside his empire. The crowned Lord Blue Shaman had given him the greatest gift an existence at his level could ever desire. Khan had given the Emperor a suitable battlefield where he could finally fight again and show the full extent of his power. He had rekindled the flame of excitement in the Emperor's life, granting him the chance of expressing what he had always had to restrain. Because, truth be told, the Emperor lived a sad existence. The very power that had put him at the peak of the regulated universe had become a curse, turning into shackles that chained him down to a dull, confined life. The Emperor couldn't disown his power because it would be an insult to his efforts and achievements. Still, he couldn't even unleash it onto unworthy foes since it would only bring him shame, leaving him quite stuck, forced to rely on his empire to spread his will. Nevertheless, that was a compromise, a boring solution to a problem with no remedy. The world simply lacked worthy opponents who could force the emperor to act personally, but that wasn't the case anymore, and he owed that to Khan. The emperor could now fight and express himself without using his empire as a proxy. In a way, Khan had freed him, and he wanted to pay him back, only for that desire to give birth to profound shame. Years and decades of inactivity couldn't just vanish overnight. Habits developed and solidified throughout enforced, methodical stillness wouldn't just fade as if they had never existed because the situation demanded it. The emperor found himself in that precise predicament. He had all the power and excitement in the world, but his body couldn't keep up. Actually, there was nothing wrong with the emperor's body. He was in his peak physical shape, but everything still felt sluggish. No matter what the emperor did, the rhythmical pace he had developed to restrain his immense existence got in the way, preventing him from unleashing the full extent of his power. Hence, the emperor felt utterly ashamed. Despite receiving the best gift he could have asked for, his performance was unbecoming, stopping him from enjoying that present while also failing to meet his benefactor's expectations. The comparison with the other side of the battlefield worsened that feeling. Khan and his opponent were going all out, unleashing everything they were capable of. However, there the emperor was, failing to do the same, finding the predicament unforgivable. Of course, the emperor was being hard on himself. He had merely lost one exchange, which wasn't much of a defeat in the first place. Being pushed away wasn't a big deal. Still, the Thilku Empire didn't work like that, and the emperor embodied its traits to their utmost extreme. His pride couldn't allow weakness for even a fraction of a second. But the problem remained and wasn't something that pride or shame could solve. The emperor didn't have the time to get rid of those terrible habits he had developed. Yet, there was another option. The sudden arrival of a black figure interrupted the emperor's privacy. The source jumped over the land of his own creation, crossing incredible distances in a single leap, only to land on the slope in front of the emperor. "Did you realize the gap in our abilities?" the short-haired alien asked, showing his intact palms. "As my counterpart, you share many of my qualities, but you are a child of an outclassed energy." The source wouldn't normally waste time in pointless talks, but he believed the emperor's lack of immediate counterattacks came from an acknowledgement of his inferiority. Yet, that couldn't be further from the truth. The emperor didn't bother responding. There was no point anyway. Instead, the newly formed ground under his feet exploded due to the sudden leap he performed. Of course, that simple leap transformed into a groundbreaking event due to the emperor's immense existence. The initial explosion was only the first of the debris that blew outward due to the violent earthquakes his action caused. The newly formed land started to crumble already, unable to withstand the tremors that ran through its fabric. Yet, both warriors disregarded their surroundings, focusing on the exchange and its unbelievable conclusion. The emperor's figure embodied the same violence unleashed onto the land, reaching unfathomable speed in no time while shooting at the source. The impact was equally groundbreaking. The slopes and land behind the source exploded as soon as the emperor slammed his shoulder on his raised palms, generating storms of debris that continued to crumble. However, the source didn't budge. The short-haired alien remained in the air despite the incredible force that had landed on his hands, completely stopping the emperor's charge. There obviously was more to the alien's feat than sheer physical strength. His palms had released a torrent of true chaos, which the emperor had tried to push back, only to leave it condensed between his shoulder and his opponent's hands. That gave the illusion of complete stillness, but the truth was different. The emperor was still advancing, crossing 1 millimeter at a time, pushing back the energy the source was releasing. Still, the pressure on the emperor grew stronger with each passing second since the source was continuing to release energy, ultimately overwhelming him. The emperor depleted his momentum, falling prey to the never-ending torrent of energy, which finally blew out of the source's palms to crash over the still trembling lands. Another world-sized tsunami of true chaos covered the area, lifting it and forming chaotic mountain chains that quickly solidified. Multiple quadrants had appeared out of nowhere in mere seconds, burying the emperor under them. Yet, the emperor wasn't someone who could be buried so easily. The new land stabilized the area, but short tremors soon spread again, until a geyser of debris rose in the distance, featuring the emperor inside. The emperor climbed his way out of the rising debris, quickly landing on solid land while stretching his shoulder. He wasn't hurt, but but he wasn't unaffected, either. Warrior of the true chaos. The Emperor called, shouting in his native language. Keep doing that. My battle instincts will need more than this to reawaken. Chapter 1548, Battered. There was no quick fix to the Emperor's predicament. He didn't have the time to train his way out of his bad habits, either. He could only gamble on the fact that his battle instincts would return before his opponent had the chance to kill him. That was obviously reckless. The Emperor's plan basically involved bashing his head onto his opponent over and over again until it understood that it had to work properly. Considering the opponent's nature, the Emperor could very well die before achieving those results. The source could also understand his strategy and decide to end the fight in a single, deadly blow. However, the Thilka weren't really big on safe compromises, and the Emperor preferred to put his life on the line. That wouldn't only apply greater pressure on his mind, it would also serve to redeem him. To remove the stain of shame, the least the Emperor could do was to wager his own life. That was necessary, both to restore his pride, pay back his benefactor, and uphold the role he had vowed to uphold. The Emperor didn't use the Nak's way of speaking in his announcement, but his aura was vast enough to echo his intentions in a way that the source could translate. Still, there wasn't much to be translated in the first place. It seemed the Emperor wanted to act like a punching bag for whatever reason, while the source's goal hadn't changed. He simply had to keep those invaders away from his father. And the best way to ensure that was to kill the invaders. Obviously, the source wasn't limited only to raw energy discharges. His twin had taken their father's matter manipulation skills, but that didn't make him a mere brute. The source generated another massive torrent of true chaos. Still, he kept it inside his body, using it to reinforce and empower the fabric of his figure, achieving a state no different from Khan's embodiment. Then, the alien jumped diagonally, generating even more true chaos that he released from under his feet, propelling him forward and generating a sudden acceleration. The combination of the true chaos internal and external empowerment turned the source into a black streak of light that instantly crossed the lands he had created, almost teleporting him in front of the Emperor. The Emperor's bad habit didn't affect his perception. That speed burst wasn't enough to make him lose track of his opponent. The source's acceleration was fearsome, but the Emperor could react to it. And react the Emperor did, wearing a broad smirk that revealed his canines while half-turning his figure, throwing a punch backed up by all the power he could muster. Nevertheless, no impact unfolded because the source had never planned to enter a contest of physical might in the first place. The true chaos the short-haired alien had kept inside his figure stirred into action, opposing his forward momentum, abruptly halting his advance while the Emperor's was still in the process of thrusting his arm. The sudden stop didn't extinguish the source's momentum. His figure might have stopped, but the force accumulated during his powerful leap was still there and began to press on his body. Yet, the true chaos-fueled alien endured that immense force pressing on him and stretched his arms, opening his palms to transform that unfathomable momentum into a shockwave. The Emperor had just finished his punch when his entire being and surroundings started to shake. Tremors that reached as deep as the very essence of his life took control of his body and area, inflicting untold damage. The technique resembled a more violent version of Khan's advanced form. The shockwave ruptured the land and the Emperor's body, cracking his skin and making his blood vessels burst open. Even the Emperor's eyes grew bloodshot, blood spurting from all his orifices while the shockwave continued to unfold. His insides were on the verge of turning into a gory pulp, and the damage extended to his immense existence, condensing it toward its breaking point. Yet, the Emperor forsook any idea of defense. Useless thoughts disappeared from his mind the more damage he withstood. The shockwave was breaking him, but he faced it willingly, using it to cleanse his brain from any hindering process. The still raised and stretched arm reflected that process. The Emperor's flesh opened all over, tainting his limb with dark patches, but he never lowered his fist, and the source witnessed something impossible. Despite the accumulating damage and the continuous pressure, the Emperor grew stronger. His attack was already complete, but something kept moving alongside his punch, growing stronger. That process inevitably reached the critical point, but not in the way the source expected. Theoretically, the shockwave should have continued to rage until the Emperor crumbled in body and soul. The attack even kept raging. Yet, it also retreated. That ethereal force that could make immaterial energies tremble was being pushed back, seemingly punched away by the Emperor. The source obviously didn't stand still before that shocking development. More true chaos escaped his palm, creating a tide that would wash away the Emperor again. However, the Emperor suddenly managed to move a fraction of an inch forward, and the straight black wave bent upward, punched away by a force the source didn't know how to describe. Deflecting the worldwide torrent exhausted the Emperor's momentum. As a vertical landmass solidified above the battlefield, the Emperor lost his foothold and flew backward, crashing into the glowing black ground. Without a foundation, the landmass that solidified in the air tilted and fell, crashing onto the land, crumbling into and lifting waves of debris. Meanwhile, the source remained still, uncaring of the crash's winds blowing from his side, staring at the spot where the Emperor had flown. As expected, an explosion unfolded from that spot, and a battered Emperor walked out of it. Blood and ruptured skin covered him all over, but his grin was broader than ever, and he even crossed his arms before shouting at his opponent. "That was good," the Emperor cried. "Do it again." Chapter 1549, Crack. The fight on the other side of the battlefield had a far more heated pace, with heated being the perfect word to describe it. Khan had lost count of how many times he had burned, both outside and inside. Those torturous exchanges had become so common that he should have grown numb to them, but the pain always felt new and terrible. To make things worse, there was no way around it. Whenever Khan tried something, a miniature star would be waiting for him, immediately exploding in all its scorching radiance. And Khan could endure it. His cells and crackling mana kept his body in one piece, shielding his vital insides, protecting him, and allowing him to continue fighting. Yet, the pain wasn't something he could avoid or fend off. The superficial layers of Khan's skin never remained intact for long. The surrounding heat was too unbearable, burning him, only for Khan's inhuman healing properties to kick in. That fixed Khan's skin, regrowing its superficial layers, only to leave them at the mercy of the scorching heat again. Purple-red sparks flashed all over his body, but that protection couldn't stop those burns. Breathing worsened that torture. The air was lava, and each breath Khan managed to take ended up burning his lungs, extending his seemingly never-ending pain. However, Khan endured everything and kept fighting. Pain couldn't make him stop. The nightmares had forged his mind in ways ordinary people couldn't even begin to comprehend. He also had the best body in the universe, so his reckless assault continued. Blinding light never stopped shining around Khan, making him virtually blind, but following his senses always brought him toward his target. The cloud was busy dealing with some of the Maker's stars, so Khan released gales of purple-red energy from his figure to cut his way through the scorching light, summoning more mana during his advance. The gales of crackling chaos devoured the light while lightning bolts formed inside Khan's palms. The latter fully materialized by the time he cut through the sea of ethereal fire, but his opponent awaited him wearing the same unperturbed, curious smile. Several exchanges had already unfolded, so the scene didn't surprise Khan. He didn't even hesitate when seeing that the Maker wielded two identical but black lightning bolts. That wasn't his first time replicating Khan's techniques, and the same went for the clash's outcome. Khan threw his lightning bolts, and the Maker copied him. The four spells clashed in mid-air, generating crackling spheres that thundered through the area and expanded, pushing away the light from the previous exploding stars. And, just like before, the black sparks outnumbered the purple-red ones. They were also thicker, denser, and louder, carrying far more energy that was arranged in a far better way. Once again, that didn't surprise Khan. The previous exchanges had already proven that undeniable point. When it came to spells, he was inferior to the Maker. That inferiority had nothing to do with the true chaos superiority over the mana. Khan's chaos had no such weakness. The issue didn't even involve the amount of energy used. The Maker did have access to a whole world of true chaos, but Khan's mana reserves were pretty much bottomless, so he could theoretically match him. Yet, no matter how much mana Khan poured into his attacks, his spells always lost the confrontation, and the reason boiled down to sheer finesse. The Maker was a true master. His ability to manipulate the true chaos didn't border on the divine. It actually belonged to that realm since he had inherited it from a proper god, and his spells reflected that unmatchable mastery. To add value to the Maker's performance, he even cast his spells only after Khan had completed his. After all, the alien couldn't copy what he couldn't see or sense, meaning he could create far better attacks in less time. It also didn't matter what the nature of Khan's spells was. He had tried lightning bolts, fire, violent gales of mana, and even simple beams. Still, the Maker could match them all and overpower them, as if his mastery knew no limit. In a way, the Maker embodied what Khan's chaos was supposed to be better than him, which made sense. As the son of a god and heir to that aspect of his divinity, the Maker's true chaos already stood beyond fire and water, beyond life and death. Of course, that superiority didn't make Khan powerless. He actually had a couple of points where he had the Maker beaten. The expanding spheres of destructive sparks soon turned pitch black, overwhelming the purple-red color and exploding into torrents of true chaos. Nevertheless, the Maker had to disregard that magnificent detonation to swing an arm to his left, blinding true chaos gathering in his open palm. A fuming figure materialized in front of the blinding palm. Khan had exploited the opportunity created by the lightning bolt's clash to lunge directly at the Maker, only for him to react to his speed. That wasn't a surprise, either, but what followed was. The Maker had gotten used to Khan's speed, so no afterimages formed in his vision. However, time slowed down in his scarlet eyes as his perception went overboard to study the next event. A scene that the Maker lacked the physical capabilities to react to unfolded in his vision. Khan rose as the miniature star started exploding, his figure matching the detonation's pace, allowing him to step on it. Then, the Maker's vision went dark. His eyes still worked, but something hard and heavy had covered them, unleashing enough strength on his face to push him back. The star's explosion flooded the area with its light at that point, but two figures quickly came out of it, rising into the air. The Maker rearranged the scorching radiance that surrounded him, turning it back into true chaos that lingered over his figure while flowing toward the crack on his forehead. Meanwhile, purple-red lights flashed at some distance from the Maker, dispersing the blinding light to reveal a charred, fuming figure. Khan was scorched all over, but enough of his skin regrew to complete his faint smile. "You do bleed then," Khan chuckled, watching as the true chaos fixed the faint wound on his opponent's forehead. Chapter 1550, Incorporation. The crack was tiny, barely a blemish on that otherwise completely unharmed figure. No drops of blood actually oozed out of that wound, either. Some of that liquid became visible, but it didn't have the time to flow down since the glowing pitch-black smoke immediately fixed it. Yet, wounds at that level had a deeper meaning. In a way, bodies were physical representations or mere shells of grander, ethereal existences. Hurting them signified the ability to touch upon those superior statuses, providing the confirmation Khan needed. Despite the Maker's divine heritage, Khan could make him bleed. Therefore, he could kill him. The alien was undeniably strong, stronger than anyone Khan had ever faced. However, they stood in the same realm. That meant that Khan didn't need enlightenment or further evolution. He didn't have to transform again somehow to be able to affect that opponent. Khan was already there. He only had to be the better fighter, and there finally was some progress. Khan hadn't really had the time to test what his body could do after spending the past weeks eating moons and other small celestial bodies. Theoretically, the change should have been slight, but it was a difference nonetheless, and those details gained utmost importance in fights at such high levels. Truth be told, that was also true when it came to the gains from the Naxx home world. The battle in Aina couldn't make Khan go all out, so he was testing what he was really capable of at that exact moment. Moreover, Khan never had the opportunity to fight such a grand opponent. That was his first time testing himself against actual stars, so it took him a few exchanges to get used to that spectacular but strange battle. That series of reckless exchanges ultimately led to confidence. Khan couldn't only fight stars. He could also win against them. Of course, everything had a price. In Khan's case, and as it had often been the case in his life, the currency for his achievements was pain. Realistically, there was no way to dodge the Maker's attacks. Even defending against them had clear limits. The alien's mastery wasn't something that could be matched. The Maker was better than Khan in ways that he couldn't even imagine himself achieving. Still, that only applied to spells and matter manipulation. Khan could rely on his body, which was finally starting to keep up with that heated battle, and another ability, which looked on the verge of the long-awaited breakthrough. The Maker watched as Khan's body healed, replacing the burns with healthy tissue, shedding off any fuming patch of flesh to restore him to his unharmed state. That recovery speed was spectacular, even surpassing what the true chaos could achieve, but something else soon claimed the Maker's attention. Khan also diverted his gaze, joining him in the inspection of the last variable in the battle. The cloud had remained in its place since the beginning of the battle, unaffected and unbothered by the bursts of scorching, obliterating light that had submerged it. Nevertheless, the spell had changed while Khan and the Maker were busy trying to kill each other, and the same went for its situation. More crackling tendrils had grown from the cloud, acting as thundering tentacles that converged at the same spot. The spell's main body had also inflated by several sizes, vouching for its power increase, which remained unable to overwhelm the blinding blockade. The Maker had initially used one miniature star to keep the cloud busy, but the latter was now against three of those, raging to no end, struggling to devour them, but still stuck in that stalemate. Just like Khan was aware of where his edge stood in that battle, so was the Maker. The alien couldn't do much against Khan's body, but that destructive life form was a different matter. Facing the cloud directly would expose the Maker, so he had opted to keep it busy. However, the plan had reached its limit. A thundering cry suddenly roared through the area, replacing any other sound. The cloud abruptly expanded, its crackling fabric washing over the blinding miniature stars to incorporate them into its body. The cloud had been unable to overwhelm the miniature stars until now, so forcing them inside its figure exposed it to the full extent of their power. The vast, tentacled cloud immediately shrank because of that. The star's gravity and scorching properties forced the spell to condense and deplete an immense amount of mana to survive the direct exposure. However, the opposite was also true. That forceful absorption put the cloud's structural integrity at risk but submerged the miniature stars in its crackling energy, forcing them to face a dense and unending version of its destruction. That reckless approach could very well mean the cloud's death. Still, it also featured one key advantage. Whatever the clash's outcome was, it would happen quickly instead of after a prolonged stalemate. Both Khan and the Maker were aware of that point, so they simply watched, keeping track of each other through their senses to intervene if either of them decided to effect that clash. The cloud's thundering cries grew louder. Its glow also intensified, but its figure kept shrinking, seemingly unable to overpower the miniature celestial bodies it had enveloped. Despite the cloud's struggles, that trend continued, eventually affecting its voice and light. The spell dimmed as its cries grew muffled, collapsing upon themselves alongside its figure. The process continued until the cloud became nothing more than a dark spark. It looked about to disappear, ready to release what it shouldn't have eaten, which the following event seemed to confirm. Another roar pierced the area, accompanied by a blinding flash. Gales of energy spread everywhere, blowing over Khan and the Maker, blinding them and messing with their senses. Then, as the two warriors' perception recovered, they found themselves immersed in a different world, which also described how the previous clash had really gone. "You took your time," Khan scoffed as purple-red light shone all over him, showing no trace of the previous glowing darkness. Chapter 1551, Wait. The miniature stars had been on the verge of suppressing the cloud, only for the opposite to happen. Khan's living spell had bested those celestial bodies, and the world changed because of it. The battlefield made of glowing darkness was no more. A purple-red color had tainted layers upon layers of that land, and similar effects extended in the areas above in far more evident fashion. The air became electric, with literal sparks manifesting into existence on their own, as if they were a natural phenomenon in that world bathed in purple-red light. As for the sky, the direct sight to the vast expanse above was no more, now hindered by a thick layer of thundering, flashing clouds. That transformation of the environment was Khan's most extensive yet, affecting both sky and ground, altering the air's very properties. However, the real achievement behind the current feat was in what Khan's mana had taken over. Tainting ordinary symphony or environments had become as easy as breathing for him, but that was a world of true chaos. The Maker looked more intrigued about the feat than Khan himself. As a member of that race, he knew how difficult tainting the true chaos was. Actually, it was theoretically impossible to accomplish for a mana-based existence. Yet, the darker-than-black color was truly gone, and that wasn't only due to mere destruction. The cloud spell had indeed pushed a lot of true chaos away during its abrupt, immense expansion. Still, some of that true chaos had switched sides, turning into raw energy that let itself be tainted by that purple-red shade. The previous exchanges had already proven it, but that show of power set the matter in stone. Khan had access to an energy no inferior to the true chaos. His individual iteration of mana truly had divine potential. The one lacking was Khan himself. Impressive, the Maker admitted, nodding to himself while inspecting the layer of raging clouds above. But do you believe I can't do the same? We both know that's not the point, Khan stated. Isn't it? The Maker wondered, and the true chaos hidden under the layers of tainted soil and above the thundering clouds moved. Waves of true chaos rose and descended, pressing onto the purple-red energy, easily pushing it away due to the home field advantage. Yet, the crackling energy fought back, slightly retreating to assume sturdier and stabler shapes, something that could help it endure that outside pressure. The isolated stalemate from before returned in far extensive, almost worldwide, fashion. A second set of clouds appeared, carrying the true chaos pitch black color. A similar event unfolded on the ground, splitting the environment in half. One side featured purple-red ground, air randomly assaulted by crackling sparks, and thundering, bright clouds. Meanwhile, the other featured dense soil, suffocating, glowing air, and a sea in the sky, creating a still bright but starkly darker environment. The two environments were also connected, pressing on each other, fighting for dominance. The pitch-black side was denser and, technically, more powerful, but the purple-red one looked more driven, seemingly putting its very life at stake in that struggle. And, Khan and the Maker hovered right between that split world, one illuminated by sparks and purple-red light, while the other was immersed in glowing darkness. The stalemate reclaimed the Maker's attention. He inspected his surroundings, showing special interest in the fronts where the purple, red and black light met. We are evenly matched, the Maker eventually declared, bringing his scarlet irises back to Khan. The mana didn't waste its efforts with you. Don't you still have those horns to break? Khan wondered. I believe your father called it ascension. My twin and I have no need for such limits, the Maker reassured. What you see is the best we can do. Truth be told, Khan had half expected that. The true chaos that surrounded him proved as much. That was no watered-down version of that superior energy. The Maker's strength was also beyond what Khan had expected or would have preferred. He was barely keeping on as it was, and that mission promised to have an even stronger opponent afterward. The situation was already as grim as it could be. Still, that tease felt necessary, both because it was in character for Khan and due to the strange vibe he sensed from his opponent and the spells he cast. Do you even want to win? Khan asked, pointing at the sea of true chaos in the pitch-black part of the sky. You don't need any of this. The Maker smiled in amusement but didn't contradict Khan. After all, he was right. The Maker didn't need to imitate his spells to prove any superiority. His stars were a far more efficient weapon to achieve victory with. But I do need this and more, the Maker declared. I would never surpass my dear father otherwise. Is that all there is to your life? Khan questioned. Surpassing your father? How could life forms such as yourself understand? The Maker muttered. You are children of the mana, but aren't direct children. Well, you are glorified Nak, Khan pointed out. Sure, you have a more distinct individuality and are definitely stronger, but that's that. We are direct sons of a superior energy, the Maker specified. My twin and I are even more direct heirs of a god. Our concepts of life are different. Do you have any idea how many eccentric people from different ways of life I had to convince to fight you? Khan scoffed. It's a miracle they didn't kill each other before getting here. The joke didn't land or, at least, it wasn't enough to trick the Maker. The alien threw a knowing glance at Khan, his following strange whisper translating into sharp words. I was wrong. You do understand. Of course, Khan understood. He had seen that way of life during his absorption of the white azure sphere. It was one of the reasons he had refused godhood. Is that wrong way of life so important to you? The Maker asked before Khan's silence. Even if your side will lose because of it. My life isn't mine to give any more, Khan declared. And you will lose. The weight I carry isn't something your matter manipulation can imitate. Chapter 1552, Monsters. That universal clash was about fundamentally opposite energies. The mana and the true chaos were similar to a certain extent, sharing the same roots and ideology, making their coexistence impossible. However, the clash was also about something more basic, which the two fighting sides perfectly embodied. It was about two different ways of life that went far beyond the biological differences the species in the regulated universe featured. The Scarlet Eyes were children of an energy. They possessed certain individualities and humanoid shapes, but there was nothing human in their psychology. Concepts like love, family, offspring, and more were foreign to the Scarlet Eyes. They used similar words, but their meaning was irreconcilable with how the people in the regulated universe understood them. That was because the Scarlet Eyes weren't born. They were created. They didn't procreate, either. The god made them. That arrangement also prevented the appearance of internal divisions. The Scarlet Eyes were united under a single banner, featuring no in-species conflicts. Meanwhile, most of the regulated universe was built around families and personal interests. It was flooded by division and driven by basic emotions. It was well-meaning and resolute, but also frail and narrow-minded. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, the Scarlet Eyes were the superior species. They had surpassed primitive necessities, achieving a state of life leagues above what the regulated universe held. Staleness could be that superior state's only real drawback. After all, complete unity also meant a lack of diversity and conflict, which were necessary for further evolution. However, the presence of a god removed that drawback, preventing any staleness, making the regulated universe's way of life outclassed on every front. Still, there was undeniable value in the regulated universe's inferior way of life. The sole fact that Khan and his allies had gotten that far in the conflict proved that. The exact primitive necessities that the Scarlet Eyes were free from acted as a fuel for the regulated universe's resolve. Everyone in the Allied front had something or someone they cared about, making them willing to fight to their last breath to protect them. Khan was no exception. Actually, he probably was the best example of that fundamental drive the Scarlet Eyes couldn't experience or relate to. So much weighed on his shoulders in the form of uplifting responsibilities, and things didn't end there for him. Khan's weight wasn't only external. It didn't only come from his responsibility toward his family, his friends, his allies, and the regulated universe as a whole. The truth was, Khan had suffered too much. He had struggled against the nightmares since he was 5, only to engage in an endless series of painful compromises and losses after enlisting in the global army. That was simply unfair. No one deserved that kind of life, but Khan had been forced to navigate it anyway, struggling to reach its end, only to discover that a bigger monster stood beyond that point. The discovery was utterly maddening. Succeeding at the impossible Nax mission had awarded Khan with a universal war. He had only wanted peaceful, nightmare-less nights, but his struggles seemed to have amounted to the greatest battle of his time. That created a furious baggage, a weight that could fuel the most pristine resolve and turn it into actual strength. It was like a profound thickness added to Khan's martial arts and spells, which the Maker couldn't even begin to understand. However, Khan could show it. He actually couldn't help but do that. All his suffering was part of him, and his element reflected it. The Maker felt an unavoidable interest in the existence that was Khan, leading him to seemingly pointless conversations. Yet, something else suddenly attracted the Maker's attention, distracting him from the previous discussion and bringing his Scarlet Eyes back to the layer of purple-red clouds. The tainted ground and electric air were mere consequences of the previous clash, but the layer of clouds acted as a bigger version of Khan's spell. It was still thundering and alive, just far vaster. Nevertheless, a new trace of life appeared in that strange living being, sharing many of its properties, but also being undeniably separate. Vast chunks of the layer of clouds moved and caved in, as if something immense was crawling through its fabric. That vague figure coiled itself among the sparks above Khan before finally peeking down. A giant reptilian head several times Khan's size slithered down the clouds, its crackling fabric seemingly being part of that thundering layer. More of that huge creature left the clouds, revealing part of its scaled body while running circles around Khan, partially enveloping him in a protective stance. Where the cloud was unrestrained and violent, the snake reeked of a distinctive, proud hunger, which its strangely detailed reptilian eyes exuded while staring at the Maker. And that wasn't the end. A humming noise joined the thunderstorm when a third, distinct trace of life manifested itself inside the layer of clouds. That third life form didn't take over any of the crackling fabric. Instead, a redder, darker purple-red light shone from a piece of the clouds, tainting the electric air to create an ethereal but visible shape. A bright but darker patch of light formed mid-air, looking like nothing more than a clump of humming energy that featured a strange, more-shaped opening at its center, pure bloodlust accompanying its sounds. "You were created to be great," Khan eventually declared, "and I can respect your god to a certain extent." The layer of clouds released a louder thunder at that point, unleashing pillar-like lightning bolts that connected the sky to the tainted ground, remaining in their place instead of disappearing. "But I had to accept so many monsters to get where I am," Khan continued. "You might be strong, but you lack the power that only true struggle can create." "Can't you see?" the Maker asked, his amused smile growing brighter. "You are my struggle, the one who will push me closer to my dear father." Khan heaved a helpless sigh and shook his head, finding the strength to add some pity to his expression. "I was just like you," Khan admitted. "I hope you'll understand before the end." Chapter 1553, Draw. The occasional philosophical turns that Khan and the Maker's battlefield took were non-existent on the Emperor and Source's side. Unlike the Maker, the Source had no interest in getting to know those invaders. His loyalty toward his father was simple but profound and unwavering, leading to a straightforward and uncaring approach to the threat. Nevertheless, that disinterest wasn't without surprise. After all, the Source's opponent was none other than the mightiest being in the regulated universe. Initially, the Source and the Emperor's clashes had been utterly simple. The Emperor seemed to want to act like a punching bag, so the Source indulged him, unleashing mighty attacks that were met with clumsy attempts to counterattack. Those attempts always failed, sending the Emperor flying away and inflicting more wounds each time, gradually worsening his battered state. However, those attempts also improved, changing the Emperor's fighting style into something that seemed uncharacteristic of such a big, brutish warrior. The Source had just finished sending the Emperor flying again when the cracked mountain in the distance exploded, erupting into a storm of debris that tainted the sky with its glowing darkness. The scene was hardly new at that point, and the same went for the red figure shooting from the pile of rising debris. The Emperor had jumped forward as soon as his feet stopped digging through the ground, throwing himself at his opponent again. The Source was ready for that sudden leap. True chaos still flooded his body, empowering its every function, turning him into an unmovable monolith, and more of that energy escaped his figure to aid his attack. A torrent of true chaos blew from the Source's back and right elbow as he thrust his arm forward, punching at the incoming opponent. The released, darker-than-black energy acted as a thruster, accelerating the attack past its physical limits, putting the Source's arm under unbearable strain. Space and time seemed to bend to allow the existence of such speed and might, but the Emperor met them head-on. Another set of far bigger knuckles slammed on the Source's punch, generating a deafening roar that threatened to shatter the sky. Two fists clashed, accompanied by an incalculable amount of energy and momentum that caused an apocalyptic catastrophe. The battlefield opened, splitting into two sides that couldn't refrain from distancing themselves. An immense rift opened on the chaotic ground below, expanding and deepening as the whole world rumbled. The only ones seemingly unaffected by the worldwide rumblings were the Emperor and the Source, which remained locked in an apparent stalemate, their stretched arms still connected by their knuckles. Yet, both warriors were experiencing the clash on a level beyond the material, and its outcome soon left visible marks. The Emperor had shallow wounds all over, and chunks of the flesh on his stretched fist burst outward, joining the rest of his injuries. That trend quickly progressed toward the Emperor's forearm and shoulder, littering his limb with jagged, gory holes that leaked dark red blood. The advancing damage seemed ready to stretch even further. Still, the Emperor's arm slightly retreated, separating the two sets of knuckles, only to use the opposing remaining momentum to his advantage. Despite lacking a foothold, the Emperor twisted himself mid-air, half spinning and lifting his thick left leg, delivering a roundhouse kick. The Source was ready for that counterattack, too. It wasn't his first time witnessing it, either. His stretched fist had no opposition now, so more true chaos blew from his elbow to propel it forward while he bent it toward the incoming kick. The alien's punch was headed for the Emperor's knee now, carrying even more momentum than before, wanting to split that whole leg in half. However, the Emperor reacted to it, kicking the air with his right leg, using a non-existent foothold to push his figure upward while continuing his spinning motion. The Source's hook ended up hitting empty air, but something landed on his hand at that point. The Emperor had ditched the roundhouse kick, his left foot descending toward the alien's fist to use it as the base for a sharp move. The Emperor suddenly accelerated. He instantly completed his spin, ending with his right leg lifted above the source's head while still standing on his black hand. The lifted leg obviously started to descend into an axe kick that carried enough power to crush the source and anything below him. Yet, the alien didn't even look at that deadly heel. Despite the Emperor's instantaneous counterattack, the source kept up with the exchange. While the axe kick descended, true chaos blew from the alien's back, knees, and feet, propelling him forward. The source became even faster now, instantly returning at the Emperor's level and slamming both his knees on his broad chest. The hit was direct, seemingly declaring the source as the winner again. Still, surprisingly, the Emperor didn't move. The Emperor had no footholds to cling to. His right leg was still lifted, and the source had even taken him by surprise. However, he remained in that spot despite the violent momentum trying to push him away. A muted cry echoed from the Emperor's throat as an evident struggle twisted his expression. His sealed teeth were in full display as more of his flesh burst into gory wounds. Something impossible followed. The massive amount of violent, ethereal momentum the source had launched forward began to retreat, as if the Emperor were an immense, advancing wall that could push that energy back. The more that ethereal force was pushed back, the louder the muted cry became, ultimately exploding into a raging shout when the Emperor managed to spread his arms. And, for the first time since the beginning of the battle, the source failed to win an exchange. The Emperor successfully turned his attack against him, sending his force back while adding some of his own. Of course, the effort exhausted the Emperor, only resulting in a draw. After the Emperor finished spreading his arms, both warriors turned into streaks of light that flew in opposite directions, crashing on the messy lands below. Chapter 1554, Emperor. The source quickly climbed out of the crater his impact with the ground had created, stepping on its edge to gaze at a similar formation in the distance. As expected, a figure jumped out of that other crater, landing heavily on the chaotic plane past it. The Emperor had also survived the previous clash, albeit his condition had worsened once again. By then, there was hardly any intact spot left on the Emperor's body. Torn flesh surrounded by dark patches littered him, reaching as far as his face. Nothing was ever too deep, but his appearance couldn't have looked more foreboding. Nevertheless, that battered appearance couldn't trick the source. He knew and had experienced the troubling truth. The previous clashes, and especially the last one, had more than proven it. Despite the accumulating injuries, the Emperor was getting stronger. His state had never stopped worsening, but his gradual improvement had ultimately led to a draw with the source. That improvement wasn't merely physical, either. The source would have easily dealt with it otherwise. Instead, everything about the Emperor was getting better. He was growing stronger, faster, sharper, and deadlier, turning his existence into something that could even affect the very momentum released by certain attacks. Moreover, the Emperor's current expression showcased nothing but disappointment while he inspected his wounded limbs. He had already achieved something that the source had to acknowledge and respect, but he looked nowhere close to satisfied. The scene made the source's mind produce a thought he never believed he could experience. For the first time since the beginning of the battle, or life for that matter, the alien considered defeat a possibility. Of course, the source didn't believe he would lose. He remained one of the two perfect sons of a superior existence, heir to part of a divine power. That wasn't a realm warriors born from an inferior energy could touch, let alone surpass. However, the source also had to acknowledge the reality of the situation. His opponent resembled a restless zombie who would be able to hurt him if he became any stronger, which could tilt the scales in his favor. Typically, the path to victory in that predicament would involve a mighty attack capable of ending the battle in a single exchange. After all, that scary growth would stop if the Emperor finally died. Still, the source had tried and failed to put his opponent down for good every time. He wasn't like his disloyal twin. He wasn't playing around or doing his best to enjoy that battle. The alien wanted to win as quickly as possible, but the Emperor wouldn't let him. And it was strange. The Emperor looked like the brutish, straightforward type, which his resilient body vouched for. Yet, his attacks also conveyed keen battle sense, and his elements seemed to have no real limitation. The Emperor didn't shoot beams or summon storms. Still, his vast existence aided his every action, expanding what he could reach and affect, making simple punches capable of pushing ethereal momentum. Things didn't end there. The Emperor's existence also made him faster when he needed to. It generated counterattacks when he couldn't move, and even allowed him to fly to a certain extent. It seemed that, as long as the Emperor needed to do something, his existence would adapt to make it possible. Those flexible elements usually had heavy drawbacks. Even Khan had to suffer for decades to get his chaos to a somewhat similar level. However, the Emperor seemed to have nothing of the sort. He could defend, attack, and more with the same growing strength as all his other actions. He was the opposite of having no specialization. He appeared to be specialized in everything. "Don't take a break now," the Emperor shouted in his native language since the source remained motionless. "I think I'm finally getting it back." That genuine excitement, which seemed to disregard the seriousness of the situation, angered the source. It would have been different if Khan had been his opponent, but he couldn't accept such playful shallowness from the Emperor. "What are you?" the source asked. "You might be my counterpart, but you are no chosen of the mana. You are just a strong child of an inferior energy." The Emperor didn't really care for conversations, especially now that he had finally stopped taking a one-sided beating. Yet, that progress was due to his opponent, so indulging him felt like a show of respect and gratitude. "I'm the Emperor of the Thilku Empire, the greatest species in the universe," the Emperor declared, using the Nax way of speaking, which he seemed to have learned during the battle. The declaration had no meaning for the source. All the children of the mana were the same in his view. While different species existed in the universe, they remained inferior life forms born from an outclassed energy. "What does that mean?" the source ended up asking, not satisfied with the answer. As the Emperor shouted, "There is no Thilku stronger than me. There is no Thilku faster than me. There is no Thilku wiser than me." That was another statement that lacked comparisons the source could understand, but the Emperor made sure to add something. "That's what the Emperor is," the Emperor stated, "because the Emperor of my empire has to be the greatest Thilku." When those words reached the source's ears, he accepted that the matter was hopeless. The Emperor might see intrinsic value in those statements, but they didn't have any. "Your species is a sub-product of a desperate diversity," the source explained. "You are blind to the true scope of the universe, which is why conquering a tiny fraction of it gives you the illusion of control." The anger the source had initially felt now turned toward himself. That surprise and slight fear of defeat were beneath him. He was the perfect son of a god. His only job was to obey and win. "I was given the power to generate universes," the source announced, straightening his arm toward the distant Emperor. "You'll see how meaningless your title and species are before my divine heritage." The alien hadn't spoken a single lie, and the Emperor was sure of it, but the terrible truth only broadened his excited grin. "That's perfect," the Emperor exclaimed. "By defeating you, I will know that my empire can conquer the universe." Chapter 1555, Vortex. Scorching waves of blinding light spread everywhere while thunderous currents of crackling mana cut through them. Massive lightning bolts connected heaven and earth while ominous humming noises filled the shining area, acting as the harbingers of death. A giant creature slithered through the fiery light, exuding bottomless, rightful hunger while navigating those obliterating waters. That chaotic, obliterating, and unsurvivable scene was the battlefield of Khan and the Maker's choosing. The apocalyptic environment was an unavoidable consequence of their clash, and heated exchanges unfolded in what was an unapproachable death zone for anyone else in the universe. Despite being behind the blinding radiance, the Maker wasn't immune to its light. His scarlet eyes had become useless long ago, but they remained open, wary, and excited, ready for the attacks he knew were coming. Something massive moved to the Maker's right, trying to be silent, but displacing and fighting against too much scorching light to remain unnoticed. Soon, a giant reptilian head appeared above the alien, its fanged maws open, seemingly wanting to eat him and all the scorching radiance that surrounded him. Yet, the Maker was ready. His arm snapped up, his half-closed hand containing something far brighter than his surroundings, which the spreading of his fingers released. That was nothing more than a different iteration of the Maker's miniature stars. He had restrained their blast, unleashing them in a somewhat straight direction. The result of that technique was an obliterating beam that engulfed the giant reptilian head, eradicating its entire upper half alongside part of its gargantuan body. Still, despite the damage, the massive snake kept moving. After all, it was a living being made of crackling mana. Losing pieces of that mostly ethereal body wouldn't really hurt it. What powered it was the will inside Khan's brain. Of course, having that huge head cut in half ruined the plan of eating the Maker. However, sparks converged in the exposed bottom of the snake's throat, shining inside that giant, bright figure before releasing a beam of its own. The Maker was ready to dodge when his ears caught humming noises coming from his escape route. His surroundings also darkened, seemingly marking the arrival of a new opponent that forced him to remain in his place. The beam ended up slamming onto the Maker's raised arm, who relied on his incredible physical resilience to endure the blow. True chaos also flew from the bright surroundings, blowing over the Maker to envelop his body in a defensive membrane. Its technique's toughness was incredible, but cracks opened on it anyway. The cracks didn't make the Maker retreat. He remained under the beam, engulfed in its destructive energy, knowing that far worse awaited him if he tried to escape. Yet, the massive snake knew that, too, which was why its beam had been more solid than destructive. The dark membrane around the Maker was gaining cracks by the second, but the attack's main effect came next. The Maker didn't retreat, but the beam pushed him aside. He only took a step to his left, but that was enough for the humming noise to administer its bloodlust. Vertical, horizontal, and diagonal cuts suddenly opened on the Maker's back, piercing through his black membrane to spread the damage to his actual skin. The Maker's tough frame tried to oppose that sharp force, but could only slow it down. Cut began to litter his back, invading him with a bloodthirsty energy that expanded the wounds on its own, trying to reach as deep as his existence. Nevertheless, light shone from inside the Maker's very body. It seemed his very organs turned into stars, and their radiance burned away the bloodthirsty energy tearing his skin to pieces. The humming noise retreated, only for thunder to replace it. A deafening roar split the sky as a massive lightning bolt crashed onto the Maker, joining the main snake's beam to add the destructive power it lacked. The already cracked membrane completely crumbled at that point, but its energy remained under the Maker's control. Those particles of true chaos imploded, unleashing a thick pushing force. The released pressure deflected the massive lightning bolt and pushed away the main snake. Even the scorching radiance in the area parted, but the assault was far from over. A V-shaped cavity opened inside the blinding sky, making room for its natural darkness. Still, a fuming figure instantly flew through it, reaching the source of that ethereal hole. Khan was a charred mess. Despite his defensive techniques, the light always managed to touch him, burning him to various degrees every time. Those exploding miniature stars simply weren't something Khan could defend against. His best strategy was to limit the received damage, letting his body's regenerative skills handle everything else. And those regenerative skills indeed never stopped working. Even as Khan charged at the Maker, his body quickly recovered, intact flesh replacing the burned patches, shedding them off. By the time Khan's leg landed on the Maker's head, he was mostly unharmed, restored to his intact state. Obviously, unrestrained mana had never stopped accumulating in his body, leading to a deadly kick. An unbearable weight fell on the Maker, trying to crush him. The heavy atmosphere around him also started to tremble, sending shockwaves toward his insides. A second Khan suddenly materialized behind the Maker, too, and a third appeared under him, unleashing instantaneous blows, deepening his injuries. Yet, a strange pulling force began to affect the area, tingling Khan's survival instincts and making him retreat. He instantly reappeared at some distance away under the thunderous clouds, with the rebuilt giant snake and ominous, humming light flying at his sides. The clouds, the snake, the dark light, and Khan stared warily at the Maker. His body was full of cracks that leaked glowing smoke now, vouching for the assault's effectiveness, but his raised, burned hand ended up claiming his opponent's attention. On the outside, the Maker wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. True chaos was gathering in his palm like it always did before birthing a miniature star. However, Khan had sensed that something was off, and the Maker soon proved his hunch right. That gathering of energy did create a miniature star, but more true chaos fused with it, and its structure eventually collapsed. The pulling force skyrocketed as a spherical hole in the very fabric of the world formed in the Maker's palm, generating a horizontal vortex that tried to melt Khan's eyeballs for daring to inspect it. Chapter 1556, Quasar. That spherical hole in the very fabric of space wasn't hard to identify. Even a layman in the scientific field like Khan could recognize the deadliest celestial body in the known universe. The theory was also solid. The Maker had already proven himself capable of creating miniature stars. That basically was his iconic ability at that point. Therefore, it stood to reason that the Maker could push that ability a step further, compressing that immense mass of energy into something even smaller, so infinitesimal that it could create a miniature black hole. The ability was terrifying, truly. It was so unfathomable that Khan couldn't even begin to comprehend it through reason. He could only accept it as a fact. However, what surrounded that infinitesimally small black hole wasn't something Khan had ever read about. Admittedly, Khan's studies had been very superficial. He was to blame for his own ignorance, and his sharp senses didn't help at all in that situation. The black hole's gravitational pull was several times stronger than that of the miniature stars, which messed with Khan's perception. It was as if that tiny but terrifying celestial body could bend his senses, too, messing with his inspection. Yet, limiting the perception to the black hole's surroundings didn't fix the issue. The celestial body naturally attracted more of the surrounding true chaos, creating something so hot it tried to burn Khan's very brain. Of course, Khan could sense something. He had to close his eyes, limit his perception, and face the attempts to melt his mind, but he could capture something from that impossible scene. That was a world of true chaos, which could assume different shapes, fabrics, and densities depending on the situation. Meanwhile, the Maker could manipulate that matter, altering it to his needs, providing his strange technique with everything it needed. The gravitational pull of a black hole, even a miniature one, should have instantly eradicated several layers of that scorched battlefield. However, only thin threads of true chaos flowed toward that tiny celestial body to create that scarlet spiral. That wasn't due to the black hole's weakness. The Maker was simply manipulating the area's true chaos, avoiding making a mess and creating condensed versions of what it would naturally absorb. Yet, the truth was that the energy that tiny celestial body was moving was immense, and it didn't immediately fuse with it. Instead, it remained trapped in its orbit, accelerating it to no end. That seemingly endless acceleration generated so much friction force that the heat and light it radiated were unbearable. Even ethereal sixth senses would burn if they tried to approach it, leaving Khan with nothing but a superficial analysis. Still, despite the lack of deeper analysis, two factors became immediately apparent. The Maker's technique was truly magnificent and unsustainable. That second detail was quite easy to notice. The spinning accretion disk lost energy to the black hole, increasing its size and intensifying its gravitational force. The first part wasn't particularly noticeable since the celestial body remained infinitesimally small, but the second was pretty evident. Khan could feel it on himself without needing to rely on external perception. And that wasn't the end, because Khan wasn't the only one feeling that intensifying pull. The Maker experienced it, too, confirmed by the true chaos leaking from his injuries, which partially failed to heal him and fell prey to the celestial body. That intensifying gravity also demanded more fuel, trapping more energy in the accretion disk, creating a self-sustaining cycle. The Maker looked able to contain it for now, but that couldn't last forever. "This quasar is the technique I created to surpass my dear father," the Maker said through his alien whisper, his voice only echoing for a fraction of a second before falling prey to the black hole, too. Hearing that word reminded Khan of a name he had read by chance but never bothered to explore. Its scientific description now stood before him, but he didn't linger in those thoughts at all. "You'll die at this pace," Khan pointed out. "I will," the Maker confirmed, "but you might die first." The magnificent spell the Maker had summoned was a ticking bomb, but neither he nor Khan wasted any more time talking about those details. The stakes had never been higher, and their respective resolve was worthy of them. "I should point out," the Maker exclaimed, "my dear father can create something like this, too, so you must hope you can beat it if you want to go after him." "So much for a technique to surpass your father," Khan joked. "Surpassing a god is no easy task," the Maker commented, wearing a complicit smile. "I can still taint you if you are scared." "Not an option," Khan refused, shaking his head. "Are you certain?" the Maker asked, his free hand reaching for the spinning quasar, performing a graceful gesture once he got into contact with its energy. The alien had stretched his forefinger and middle finger, using them as a brush that threw away some of the quasar's energy. That scarlet radiance struggled to escape the black hole's pull, but Khan's brain sounded every available alarm when it did. The creatures surrounding Khan reacted faster than he did. The giant snake snapped forward, the layer of clouds threw a massive lightning bolt, and the humming canvas condensed into a bright slash that cut onward. The blood shield, also activated, clotting Khan's blood vessels and starting to turn his figure black, only for a vertical wound to open on his torso, cutting him from shoulder to thigh. The wound was deep, but no blood leaked out. The injury's edges were charred, cauterized, and fuming, alongside anything the attack had touched. Khan wasn't the only one affected. The just restored reptilian head was severed diagonally, its split pieces hovering past the main body. The humming slash had shattered, becoming harmless light, and the massive lightning bolt was no more, reduced to dispersing sparks. Then, the pain arrived. A burning sensation spread from Khan's very insides and existence, as if someone had set fire to his blood and organs. Yet, Khan's mind remained stuck on the previous event, frozen in a shocking realization. He hadn't seen the attack at all. Chapter 1557, Climax. The temporary break from the tight succession of exchanges gave the Emperor the opportunity to divert his attention, which the other battlefield claimed. Something unbelievably bright and scorching had appeared on the other side of the battlefield, its scarlet heat stretching as far as the Emperor's position. Even from a distance, the Emperor felt warm looking at that phenomenon, having to cut his inspection short to avoid suffering pointless burns. Still, that didn't stop the Emperor from realizing what was happening. He didn't need to study the event any longer to understand that the other battle had reached its climax. The Emperor also knew that Khan wasn't alone in that. A single look at his state was enough to confirm that. The succession of exchanges was steadily bringing the Emperor back to his peak form, but his body paid the price for that recovery. The Emperor looked down, only to be met with a gory, depressing sight. His military uniform was long gone, exposing the vast patches of dark blood that had almost covered him in his entirety. And, under that blood, torn flesh that occasionally reached as deep as the Emperor's bones remained open, not bleeding, but not healing, either. Of course, the Emperor could force himself to heal, redirecting his immense existence toward that process. However, his opponent wouldn't just let him recover, and he looked beyond livid already. The Emperor lifted his gaze, stopping caring about his poor state, only for an apocalyptic sight to fill every corner of his vision. Oceans of glowing darkness blew everywhere, filling sky and ground. Mountains solidified mid-air, only to fall prey to the area's gravity and crumble down. Chaotic lands made of hills, immense plains, and incredible gorges formed, only for entire quadrants with different layouts to settle above them, adding giant layers to the already lifted ground. Truth be told, that worldwide replacement had already occurred many times, leaving the Emperor in quite an elevated location. The central mountain was still way taller, but its elliptical portal had long since been buried under the new lands. And the source stood at the center of all that, releasing massive amounts of true chaos non-stop, being the literal source of all of creation. His figure generated entire worlds in the form of glowing energy, painting an endless, pitch-black canvas behind him, while his scarlet eyes were wide in anger. That was because true chaos didn't only leak from the source's back. It also flowed out of the few injuries on the alien's hands and central horn, which the Emperor had managed to damage. Clearly, the source hadn't liked that last part. The current endless release of true chaos had actually started after the Emperor had opened a crack in that central protuberance, escalating the battle to its climax. The Emperor would last much longer, and the source seemed to have unleashed his ultimate technique. The next exchanges were bound to be the last, and the Emperor didn't know how they would end. Of course, the Emperor didn't really waste thoughts on those worries. Losing simply meant that he deserved to die. It would mean that he belonged among the weaklings, who had no right to live in the first place. However, obviously, the Emperor wanted to win, both due to pride in himself, his species, and the Empire, and to fulfill his duty toward the Allied front. He had chosen to join those dangerous fights, so it was his responsibility to win. The problem was how. Admittedly, the source's technique was far from complicated. The alien did devise abilities around his inherited divine gift, but they were pretty straightforward, too. Nevertheless, simplicity didn't imply easy ways to counter it, especially in the source's case. He was only releasing raw true chaos, but there was enough of it to create entire solar systems. Now, the Emperor could punch his way out of a planet or two. He could probably handle one compressed solar system, too, but the source had far more than that in store. Luckily, the source didn't want to play games. He could use his endless energy to waste time, gradually wearing the Emperor down, but his furious face hinted at the opposite. The source didn't waste time on pointless words. He was there only to enact punishment on the invaders, so he stretched his damaged arms, pointing them at the distant opponent. Techniques were superfluous, and battle strategies were demeaning. The source had inherited true divine power, so he would unleash all of it in its most basic but pristine form. The entirety of the never-ending world that was growing from the source's back changed direction. The immense pitch-black canvas collapsed forward, turning into a tsunami of true chaos that seemed to reach as high as the celestial body's orbit. That wasn't the end. More true chaos escaped the source's damaged hands, adding a thickness that the Emperor soon became unable to perceive to the advancing tsunami. A wall capable of separating giant celestial bodies had taken form, ready to submerge the Emperor once and for all. As the worldwide tide began to collapse, the Emperor lifted his gaze, only to realize that he couldn't see its tip anymore. That impossibly giant structure had already surpassed his location, and its fall threatened to crush him before the actual clash could happen. Unbearable pressure soon descended on the Emperor due to the air the tsunami was displacing, intensifying with each passing second. It was unclear how powerful it would become, but his open injuries started bleeding again under its weight. Dodging such a thing was simply impossible, not that the Emperor even entertained the idea. Only one path existed in his mind, and that was forward. The Emperor lowered his gaze, and his aura surged. The existence built throughout hundreds of wars unleashed its full power, pushing aside any unwanted pressure, fighting against enough atmosphere to cover multiple celestial bodies. Then, the Emperor jumped, shooting toward that gargantuan wave of true chaos, heading toward his now invisible opponent, a simple plan rooted in his mind. He would carve a path through the tsunami or die trying. Chapter 1558, Taking Over. Nothing could protect Khan from the quasar's energy. Nothing could even hope to block those particles accelerated beyond any reasonable or unreasonable level. The crackling snake, with all its massive size, was less than air before that scorching power. The humming slashes couldn't even find anything to cut since each attack went beyond the concept of instantaneous. The layer of clouds and all its thundering might were powerless, too, and the same went for the blood shield. Getting cut was unavoidable, and sudden death became a possibility. A single cauterized wound in the right place could kill Khan on the spot, so he dropped any attempt at defense. He only left the blood shield in place while focusing his entire attention on attacking. Because, even before that unthinkable spell, Khan had a plan that didn't involve simply waiting for the miniature black hole to become too big to control. Actually, that was another death sentence he had to prevent at all costs. The scarlet, accelerated energy was too quick to dodge and too piercing to block, but the Maker still had to perform his brush-like gesture to launch it. Additionally, the Maker had to aim, giving Khan a certain window of opportunity he could exploit. His survival instincts also sort of provided timely warnings, making him far from powerless. The layer of clouds descended from the sky and expanded downward, submerging the area in its crackling fabric. The pillar-like lightning bolts exploded into countless sparks in the meantime, fusing with that cluster of thundering energy. Of course, the clouds couldn't completely submerge the area. That was a world of true chaos in the end, and that energy posed a certain resistance to that vast expansion and attempted contamination. The crackling fabric also couldn't get anywhere near the Maker since unfathomable scorching power kept spinning in his palm. The black hole required the alien's entire concentration to control. Still, it acted as a constant defensive technique, absorbing anything that fell prey to its gravity, including some purple-red sparks. Therefore, the Maker's surroundings remained clear, but that didn't stop Khan's plan from succeeding. The alien actually immediately realized that just by looking around. The clouds couldn't submerge the alien or his surroundings, but they could encircle him. The Maker found himself in a vast, spherical, but incomplete cage of purple-red energy that did its best to hide anything past it, especially the person flying through it. That crackling cover prevented the Maker from aiming properly. He had no target to go after anyway. Since the clouds shared one of the main aspects of Khan's element, they were the perfect hiding spot for him. However, not knowing where Khan was didn't make the alien powerless, far from it. The accretion disk had all the deadly energy he could want, and the tiny black hole could deal with the crackling cage issue. Despite the danger of the move, the Maker relinquished part of his control over the miniature black hole, and its pulling force instantly increased again. The clouds had tried and failed to cut off the Maker from the world of true chaos, and the increased gravity ended up sucking their crackling fabric toward that spherical hole. Needless to say, the attracted sparks turned into raw energy that added fuel to the technique. The black hole grew even bigger in return, steadily escaping the Maker's control, but he only had eyes for the parting clouds. The incomplete cage was still in place but had grown thinner, shallow enough for the Maker's perception to start sensing something. Only vague hunches reached his mind, but he didn't hesitate to act upon them. The Maker dipped his fingers into the quasar and swiftly waved them out, sending some of that energy past the black hole's gravitational force. The released scarlet energy didn't flash. It was so fast that the world almost failed to record it, but consequences unfolded nonetheless. The sea of clouds in front of the Maker parted horizontally, revealing the black sky past it. However, the Maker only cared about the figure inside that horizontal cut. Khan was there, his arms crossed before his face, featuring a cauterized cut that extended to his torso, joining the previous one. The second cut stretched deeper than the previous one, but it still wasn't enough to put Khan out of commission. Still, as the Maker dipped his fingers in the quasar again, something else attacked him from behind. A thundering hiss filled the area as the gargantuan snake snapped out of the cloudy cage, its open maws heading directly for the Maker. The alien didn't bother turning. The snake did reach him, but the black hole started affecting its very fabric, dismantling it piece by piece. The giant creature was coming undone quickly, but used the acceleration provided by the enemy's technique to close its mouth. That quickened its destruction, leaving nothing but a purple-red haze around the Maker, which the black hole immediately began absorbing. However, a humming noise followed. The reptilian head was no more, but its lingering energy suddenly started exuding a bottomless bloodlust. That purple-red mist came alive, gaining sharp properties that flowed alongside the black hole's absorption. That flow seemed to hint at the fact that the sharp energy had fallen prey to the black hole, which it did. Yet, the Maker also saw something else. Somehow, the gravitational force in one direction was wavering, severed by the sharp bloodlust. An opening had appeared, but the Maker reacted accordingly. He waved his fingers upward, into that blind spot in the gravitational force, only for a figure to materialize above him. Khan did try to attack through the opening in the black hole's gravity, but the Maker had been faster. A vertical cut split his face in two, stretching alongside the rest of his body, severing him in half. Victory seemed to have arrived, only for the Maker to realize something. The Khan he had split in half didn't have the previous two injuries, and he soon saw why. The two severed halves became unstable, a purple-red color taking over their shades. That fake flesh also split into sparks, which thundered once before unleashing a destructive explosion. Waves of obliterating mana tried to wash over the Maker, only for the black hole to take care of them. However, someone flew through them, heading for that miniature celestial body. Khan appeared among that storm of disappearing sparks, his hand stretched toward the black hole, his domineering aura aflame. An otherworldly will to dominate everything and everyone filled the area, leading to an impossible scene. The miniature black hole and its scorching accretion disk gained tinges of purple-red light. The partial loss of control of the technique exposed them to new influences, which Khan unleashed in an attempt to take over it. And, to the Maker's surprise, Khan was succeeding, forcing his technique to let go of its immense energy. Khan wanted to defuse it, so the Maker used his dwindling control to detonate it. Chapter 1559, Three Phases. Tremors that shook the very fabric of existence reached the Emperor's ears. His organs churned under that unexpected pressure, worsening his state, opening countless internal injuries. An immense external pressure also weighed on the Emperor, combining its power with the distant, unexpected attack, threatening to bring him down. Yet, he didn't fall. Something massive had unfolded on the other battlefield. Something equally great had filled the Emperor's surroundings, but none of that ever affected his thoughts. His mind was clear, focused on a singular task. Nothing but glowing, darker than black waves of darkness surrounded the Emperor, constantly washing over him and attempting to submerge him. He had never faced anything so great, but that couldn't reach his thoughts, either. Only the path forward existed, the trajectory the Emperor knew would bring him to his opponent. Everything else was superfluous. Everything else couldn't have any meaning until the Emperor overcame that challenge. The challenge had the shape of a worldwide tsunami that could submerge solar systems, so the Emperor had to focus the entirety of his existence on something far simpler. All of himself had condensed into the most basic action possible, a single step forward. The rhythmical habits the Emperor had developed to contain his power reappeared to aid him. He broke down his counterattack into 3 phases that used all his power, making their execution as perfect as possible. The first phase saw the Emperor thrust his arms forward. The second made him spread his limbs to clear the path, and the third wanted him to advance into that now empty area. That was all. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, existences in the regulated universe had condensed all his power into those 3 mundane gestures. The practice would almost be demeaning if it weren't necessary. Evolved warriors could summon magnificent attacks that defied reason, but the Emperor needed something else now. He required an efficient move that didn't apply any mental strain so that he could repeat it endlessly. That 3-phased move was the best compromise. The Emperor didn't need to think to perform it. He could automate his brain to continue reiterating it for all eternity. Of course, the move wasn't perfect. The parted pitch-black waters still pressed on the Emperor, attempting to blow him away and crush him, but that was the whole point behind his assault's simplicity. The methodical advance preserved the Emperor's foothold while bringing him closer to his opponent. Everything else was about whether the Emperor would last until the worldwide tsunami ended. So, the Emperor kept advancing, stuck in that self-imposed 3-phased cycle. His state kept worsening, but he didn't feel any pain. The pitch-black, glowing darkness never ended, but he experienced no despair. He had become a machine that couldn't think and whose sole function was to step forward. Meanwhile, on the other side of the worldwide tsunami, the source remained in his place, standing atop a mountain of his own creation, his expression angry but solemn as his hands kept releasing true chaos. Truth be told, the source had never expected the Emperor to manage to hurt him, especially on his face. His horns were a trademark of his species, a feature chosen by his great father, so he couldn't forgive himself for allowing his opponent to damage them. Yet, there was little the source could have done about that, hence the solemnity in his expression, which his perception deepened. He could sense what was happening inside his tsunami. Honestly, it was impossible not to due to its troubling echoes. On the inside, the Emperor's 3-phased strategy could look simple, but the world had something else to say about that. The source sensed how each one of the Emperor's steps displaced enough true chaos to build celestial bodies. He was basically swimming his way through entire planets, inexorably getting closer to the one generating them. Consequences that could destroy the environments in whole worlds unfolded inside the tsunami every time the Emperor took a step forward, and the source could only watch him progress. That wasn't out of lack of alternatives. The source was using his best attack, but he could rely on different battle strategies. However, the battle had more at stake than mere victory. The Emperor had challenged the source's very divine legacy, and the latter couldn't stop relying on it. It would be an admission of inferiority, which would be an insult to his godly father. So, the clash became about whether a life form born from an inferior energy could overcome a fraction of true divinity. And, strangely, the source found some peace in those existential but simple states. He and his opponent were doing their best, so everything became about the fundamental truth behind that clash. Its outcome would reveal who was truly superior between the true chaos and the children of the mana. That peace saved the source from wearing unbefitting expressions when two bleeding, 6-fingered hands pierced the flowing true chaos before him. The source didn't react even when those huge hands parted, pushing the true chaos aside to reveal his battered opponent. The Emperor's right eye was closed and bleeding. Blood vessels popped out all over his body, with many already burst open, but he was alive and stuck to his strategy. The source's appearance didn't surprise the Emperor, either. The latter showed no emotion as he took a step forward, occupying the area he had cleared with his strategy's 2nd phase. Then, the Emperor simply repeated the cycle. He thrust his arms forward, and his fingers stabbed the source's chest. He spread his limbs, and his hands tore the alien apart. Finally, the Emperor took another step, and his figure slammed into his maimed opponent, sending him flying away, blasting him into the distant ground. The source's body broke during the crash. His open chest was damaged beyond repair, and the violent impact with the ground finished shattering it. His torso-less head flew away, only for a shadow to tower over it once it stopped. The Emperor watched the head resting on the ground, and the latter looked back at him. A strange, understanding exchange of glances unfolded before the Emperor lifted his huge arm, delivering a descending, final punch. Chapter 1560, Dust. A blast of incredible proportions expanded as far as the eye could see, obliterating anything in its path, its scorching fury seemingly having no end. The pillar of scarlet, eradicating energy reached as far as the place's orbit while stretching into the other battlefield, destroying the many overlaid lands and digging into their foundation. The blast also crashed on the central mountain, clearing anything that surrounded it, restoring its floating state. That huge structure even shook, but the tremors quickly subsided, failing to inflict any damage. The pillar shone for a long time, adding warm redness to the world, but its energy eventually began to run short. Its size gradually shrank, abandoning the orbit and retreating to its place of origin, until it disappeared altogether. That retreat didn't remove the redness. Melted and forged true chaos shone with scarlet shades all over the battlefield, too hot even to release smoke. A boundless, perfectly flat, burned plain had formed, expanding everywhere in the far distance. The high temperature made the area unapproachable, but the world slowly cooled it down, removing the red shades, restoring the true chaos to a simple pitch-black state. The immense plain remained in all its flat purity, but the worst seemed to have gone by. Actually, there was a trace of impurity in that immense plain. Someone stood at the center of that perfectly flat surface, unmoving, dark, but definitely alive. The Maker looked completely unharmed while gazing at his now empty hand. His magnificent technique was no more, but he kept studying the spot where it had once been, lost in thought. After a while, the alien lowered his hand and diverted his gaze, pointing his scarlet eyes at a relatively nearby spot to his side in time to catch its surface burst upward. The explosion was small, only creating a tiny blemish on the perfectly flat plane. Yet, the hole was big enough for a humanoid figure to crawl out of it, or at least what was left of that body on the verge of falling apart. There was virtually nothing intact about the newcomer. The entirety of his skin was black and charred, featuring cracks all over. He had no hair, half of his right leg was missing, some fingers were gone, and part of his insides were in the open, unable to bleed due to the cauterization. However, despite that terrible state, the newcomer was alive and crouched to the flat surface while the unburnt chunks of his insides released a hiss only the Maker could hear. A horrid process visible to the naked eye followed. The charred layers of flesh fell off the burned figure, including the cauterized chunks of the exposed organs. Rosy, reddish tissues became visible, and blood spurted out without the cauterized membrane around the widespread injuries. Still, new flesh also grew, quickly replacing anything the figure had shed. The process didn't stop at the flesh. Bones, tendons, and muscles regrew, filling what the previous blast had destroyed. The missing leg and fingers reappeared, regaining their superficial skin, returning to their original state. At last, thick blue hair grew from the just restored skin on the no longer charred figure's head, becoming long and hiding his face while he remained crouched on the ground. Then, a hoarse, loud breath resounded, followed by even louder coughs that culminated in retches. The figure puked charred chunks of tissue that had remained stuck inside his body before ultimately lifting his head, illuminating the Maker with his glowing blue eyes. Khan hadn't felt that hungry, exhausted, and drained in ages, but only focused on steadying his breath for now. His strength quickly returned, allowing him to stand up while he wiped his mouth with his arm. Khan didn't feel good at all. He couldn't after what he had been forced to survive and recover from, but his glowing eyes remained firm when they looked deep into the Maker's. The alien matched the glowing gaze before looking away, wearing a helpless smile that a sigh followed. "What makes you fight sounds interesting," the Maker admitted, speaking through his strange whisper. "Teacher," Khan said, only for his hoarse voice to get in the way, forcing him to clear his throat before resuming. "There's more to my life than my mission. It's why I could convey so much." "I see," the Maker muttered, a pensive expression dawning upon his face. "There is power in that, too." Khan didn't reply. Honestly, he only wanted to lie down and rest, but the war wasn't over, and that opponent had earned the right to his attention. "Were you serious?" the Maker eventually wondered. "Would you have really let me join your side?" "Why not?" Khan responded, shrugging his shoulders, hiding how sore they felt. You wouldn't have been the strangest being to join me anyway. The Maker chuckled, glancing at Khan again. Maybe in another life. Khan matched that bitter smile, not knowing how to feel. On the one hand, the Maker was his enemy, his destined nemesis. However, he was also his counterpart, reflecting much of what he could have become. I'll build an organization that can welcome you, too, Khan promised. I'll take your will so that it will never disappear. Promises are wasted on me, the Maker scolded. Our concepts of life are too different for your words to hold any weight. The Maker diverted his gaze again, glancing at the horizon. And your promises are worthless if you can't defeat my dear father, the Maker continued. He is stronger than you can even imagine. That was indeed worrying, but Khan sealed the thought in the back of his mind. It was too late to do anything about it anyway. But I wish I could have seen that organization of yours, the Maker sighed, lifting his hand as if trying to search for his spell again. I guess this is what regret feels like. Then, a crack opened on the Maker's figure, and another followed, triggering a chain reaction that ended when the alien's body lost its structural integrity, turning into black dust that blew over the perfectly flat plain.